A chorus of praise from the West on the release of former Ukrainian pilot Nadezhda Savchenko. She was found guilty of assisting in the murder of 2 Russian journalists and freed as part of a prisoner swap deal with Moscow. Workers at a French nuclear plants are to walk out on a 24-hour strike over labour law reforms, fueling fears over safety at the facilities. A rally for Republican frontrunner Donald Trump is again marred by fierce clashes between critics and supporters, as the billionaire's events are consistently targeted by protesters. It's midday here in Moscow, and you're watching RT International Live with me, Nadira Tudor. Welcome to the programme. 2 Russians have returned home after more than a year in a Ukrainian jail. Their release was part of a prisoner swap deal between Moscow and Kiev. RT's Marina Finoshina witnessed their arrival.
A long-awaited moment for 2 Russian citizens and their wives who have been waiting their return home for 1.5 years.
We were waiting for them and hoping they would come home. We believed that they wouldn't be abandoned. It was so hard emotionally.
Former soldiers Yevgeny Yerofeyev and Alexander Alexandrov were seized last May. Kiev claimed they were serving in the Russian Special Forces, which Moscow denied, saying they were volunteer anti-government fighters. Both men were sentenced to 14 years in prison for terrorist activities and were tried as non-combatants. The 2 Russians were swapped for Ukrainian former military pilot Nadezhda Savchenko. She was found guilty of assisting in the killing of 2 Russian journalists in eastern Ukraine. Savchenko returned to Kiev on Wednesday. It quickly grabbed the headlines in the Western media, which hailed her return as triumphant.
Well, after almost 2 years in a Russian prison, a Ukrainian pilot is back home.
Her release is being seen as a political victory for Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko.
So quite a significant moment there for the pilot, the president and the Ukrainian nation.
To many, she's a hero, and for Ukrainians, her release will only reinforce that.
Some Western leaders have also been celebrating her release, but, as RT's Murat Gazdiev explains, the background to Savchenko's case has been overshadowed by the hype.
Attention passengers, it's your last chance to jump on this bandwagon. The Savchenko Express is leaving the station.
I am happy and relieved that Ukrainian pilot Savchenko has been freed. We've waited for a long time and worked hard for this good news.
Nadia Savchenko is free and back in Ukraine. Long-awaited good news that the EU celebrates together with her country.
We have been waiting for Nadia Savchenko's freedom for a long time. A good signal and news today for her family, friends and the whole of Ukraine.
She's been found complicit in the murder of 2 journalists, but she's nevertheless found fans worldwide. What is it about her? Is it the hair? Is it the nationalist zeal? Or is it the attitude? And she loves a good fight. Enlisted early on, she ended up in an airborne division. Not satisfying enough, so she went off to fight in Iraq during the US invasion there. Still not enough adrenaline, so she trained for and started flying a military helicopter. And in 2014, Christmas came early for Nadia. This time, the war had come to her. Non-commissioned at the time, she was among the first to sign up. But the good times didn't last.
То есть вы сюда поехали добровольцем?
Как точно.
Что же вам не хватало? Адреналина?
Адреналина мне по жизни хватает.
She was captured, apparently, immediately after shells, guided by her, killed 2 Russian journalists. And now that she's free, she says she's ready to go at it again.
Я хочу вам сказати, так, я не поверну мертвих, але завжди готова покласти своє життя ще раз на полі бою за Україну.
You'd perhaps expect no less, and we asked one of her chief backers, the US State Department, what they thought about their mascot warmongering.
Well, look, I mean, she was a soldier who was imprisoned while in combat in eastern Ukraine, fighting separatists, fighting Russian troops on the ground at the time. I don't know what her military future holds, but, you know, I think she's speaking from that perspective.
Ukraine's darling G.I. Jane is back, and her thirst for action, it seems, proving infectious.
We've brought back Nadezhda Savchenko, and we'll also bring back the Donetsk region and Crimea under Ukrainian rule.
Maybe you'd expect a little more sensitivity, what with the whole internationally backed peace plan and all. But nah, after all, there's that bandwagon to catch, the Savchenko Express.
And while Nadezhda Savchenko is hailed as a hero in Ukraine and in the West, not everyone is taking that at face value.
It really is a sad day in terms of watching the Western reaction to this. These are journalists who were murdered by the Ada Battalion. This is a neo-Nazi volunteer group financed by oligarchs and against the people of Donbass. This is a murderer who's taking part in the repression of the people of Donbass on behalf of Poroshenko. And Poroshenko himself tweets that, you know, I'll get Crimea back as easily as I got Nadezhda Savchenko back, which is absolutely contradictory to any agreements.
I think this salute to Savchenko is a cover-up of the deep resentment and disillusion of the vast majority of Ukrainians, particularly in Kiev. The polls indicate that Poroshenko and his team in the cabinet have less than double-digit support, and they have to dredge up this beer hall demagogue that pretends to be some kind of a hero.
In the U.S., you know, she's hailed as some kind of Nelson Mandela, who's been a political prisoner all this time. There's no mentions of the crimes that she's convicted of committing. So I think it's a bigger deal outside of Ukraine, is my guess.
As we've mentioned, Nadezhda Savchenko was found guilty of assisting in the murder of 2 Russian journalists in eastern Ukraine. But even as she's being hailed a hero nationally, journalists continue to face danger while working in the country. The so-called Peacekeeper website has resumed publishing the personal information of journalists covering events in Ukraine. Hundreds are already on the website that's branded them enemies of Ukraine. The site is being run by one of the country's MPs, who's also an aide to the Interior Minister. Last year, it published the personal details of Ukrainian journalist Oles Buzina, who was killed in Kiev days after the information was released. My colleague Kevin Owen spoke to Konstantin Dolgov, Foreign Russian Ministry's Special Representative on Human Rights, about the website's activity.
It is absolutely scandalous that this site continues to function, given the situation with the freedom of expression and of the media in Ukraine, which is an awful situation. Witch hunting continues in Ukraine, and against this backdrop, releasing this information can be considered and viewed as a clear and present danger for the lives of those journalists. There is absolutely no doubt that not a single step taken by this particular site could have been taken without, if not direct support, then at least some indirect backing from the authorities. It's a gross violation of human rights, of definitely rule of law standards, and it is a gross violation of international obligations of Ukraine. And with these violations, they want to become closer to the European Union. You know, it's ludicrous.
And you can watch the full interview with the Russian Foreign Ministry's human rights chief on our website, Rt.com. Workers at nuclear plants in France are joining strikes against controversial labour reforms. The move follows ongoing industrial action at oil refineries that has led to fuel shortages and long queues at petrol stations across France. The first nuclear workers who started to strike were from a plant 120 kilometres from Paris. It produces 30% of the region's power. They walked out for a 24-hour strike that started on Wednesday evening. Now, other nuclear plants in France have voted to join the strike on Thursday morning. In total, 16 plants out of 19 are taking action. Nuclear power provides about 75% of the country's electricity, and the result of this strike still isn't clear. We spoke to the National Federation of Energy and Mines about the trade union's goals.
We will create difficulties in electricity production, but of course avoid a major blackout. Our goal is not to deprive the entire country of electricity, but to draw the attention of the government and entrepreneurs to the problems created by this labour law.
It's not only the power outage that worries specialists. Even though the reactors won't completely stop running, the possibility of an emergency could increase considerably. We spoke with engineer John Large about the risks.
Look, the primary risk of closing down a nuclear power plant is a very ordered situation. When you close down a plant, you have to balance the pressure and the temperature of the nuclear circuit. But the real problem here is this. If these people go on strike, closing down a nuclear power plant not only takes 6 to 8 hours, but also once it's closed down, you then have to provide electricity to keep the plant cool, because the fuel inside the nuclear reactor continues to generate a very substantial amount of heat. And if it's not cooled, it will melt down. If this is confined to one nuclear power plant, Nogent-le-Son, if that's the limit, that's fine, because EDF can bring in other personnel from other nuclear plants to actually look after that plant. The real problem is if this strike becomes a wildcat strike and moves to other nuclear plants, then EDF, the operator, the management, will have considerable difficulties finding sufficient resources to operate all of these plants or close them down and maintain them safe. It puts the plant, but particularly the local communities, at risk. If something goes wrong with the strike action, if the right personnel are not there, or mistakes are made in a hurried intervention to close the system down, then of course the reactor, which has enormous thermal and potential energy, can actually destroy itself. So that's the additional risk that you take when you take industrial action, unplanned industrial action, at a nuclear power plant.
The standoff between the French government and the unions is growing more intense. The government has accused the unions of holding the country hostage and refused to back down. It promises to do everything it can to normalise the situation. The blockades are part of a bigger standoff over highly unpopular labour law reforms. Tens of thousands have taken to the streets of France in recent weeks. Protesters claim the changes will strip workers of some of their rights and will make it easier for companies to lay off people. The government argues it will help to improve the unemployment situation. English has become part of a greater debate about the UK's place in or out of the EU. Supporters of the In campaign have tried to win over young voters with this catchy video. But the ad has also drawn a fair share of ridicule online. Some think it's so bad it must have been produced by the Brexit camp. Others called the hashtag an absurdity for equating young people with being thick. Pro-Brexit campaigners were quick to parody the video. Earlier, my colleague Andrew Farmer discussed the efforts of the pro- and anti-Brexit camps with political commentators Chris Bambury and John White.
The real desperation of the campaign are the scare stories which have been fed. For instance, the scare story today was that if Britain leaves, it'll be doomed to 2 more years of austerity, when actually Europe is doomed to austerity under the hands of the European Union. And we've had a succession of scare stories from the head of the International Monetary Fund, from the governor of the Bank of England, preaching all sorts of doom if people dare to vote the way that the British elite don't want them to vote, which is to leave the European Union.
The Remain campaign is deplorable, I have to say. But that doesn't mean that the Brexit campaign is anything to shout about either. Driving Brexit is the ugly forces of British nationalism, the empire loyalists, the xenophobes, and even worse. And if they do succeed, they will be the beneficiaries, because what will be unleashed in Britain will be a wave of right-wing consciousness. So we cannot, in any circumstances, give these people any tractions. They will be the beneficiaries, not the left.
No.
Chris, reply to that. Why won't this see a wave of right-wing politics in Britain if we choose Brexit?
Let's just say, if there's an exit vote, the Conservative Party will be split down the middle. David Cameron will have to go. And furthermore, I would say to John, the forces of British capital, big business, European capital, American capital, Barack Obama, are all urging a yes vote, a vote to stay, because they want Britain in Europe. So if the big boys of world capitalism want Britain to stay in Europe, maybe people in the West should be thinking there's something here to vote against.
The inference that the EU is impeding socialism and democracy in Britain does not stack up. All worker safeguards in Britain, as such as they are, come from EU legislation at present. And if Brexit comes to pass, those will be ripped to shreds. The forces driving Brexit in this country are not the left, it is the extreme right, and marching in lockstep with them towards Brexit is a massive mistake that history will not forgive, I contend.
More news is coming your way after this short break. Don't go away.
Most people think to stand out in this business, you need to be the first one on top of the story, or the person with the loudest voice or the biggest ratings. In truth, to stand out in the news business, you just need to ask the right questions and demand the right answers. Question more.
There was failure to disclose on the part of policymakers when they bailed out these bankers by lowering rates. They could have said, if they were being honest, that in 10 years' time, these pension funds will go bust and these retirees will have no money and will starve to death. They could have said that at that time if they understood simple mathematics.
Welcome back to the programme. A BBC documentary, The Last Whites of the East End, showing the lives of a London community that has seen an influx of tens of thousands of immigrants, has seen quite a backlash.
I feel a foreigner in my own borough. We were born here, lived here, finding ourselves marginalised out of the area.
Over the past 15 years, some 70,000 immigrants have moved into the East End of London. Some districts now have over 70% of their population made up from ethnic minorities. That's according to the BBC documentary. Its portrayal of an ethnic divide in the community has been praised by some viewers. Like this tweet that points out that the film has essentially highlighted the real situation in the community. That view was echoed by others who praised the film for what they said was telling the truth. However, there has also been plenty of negative reaction, like this post that called the report, quote, awful and one-sided. It also slammed the film for being racist. Others joined in and criticised the filmmakers for being simply ignorant. Dili Hussain from the Muslim Five Pillars website says the documentary has exposed a highly sensitive issue.
This isn't the first time BBC's done documentaries under its Panorama series, which have been very clearly Islamophobic and not conducive to community cohesion. So it's actually becoming an established editorial policy amongst many mainstream media outlets. There is a growing sentiment of the population of this country moving towards the right. And again, I will go beyond just addressing symptoms. The root cause is that we have a government and a media establishment which consistently and frequently demonizes Islam and Muslims and immigrants. Mainstream media is a vessel upon which public opinion is influenced. Even if the BBC was to publish an apology, the damage has already been done.
Responding to the criticism, the BBC says the film explores both the positive and negative views on a variety of issues. A rally for Republican front-runner Donald Trump has once again been the scene of mass protests. Anti-Trump demonstrators clashed with supporters of the billionaire outside a convention center in Anaheim, California. Officers in riot gear used force to separate protesters, and several activists have been arrested. Chants of "Build the Wall" were met with projectiles and condemnation from anti-Trump activists. They also carried signs reading "Make America Hate Again," decrying the Republican frontrunner's views on immigration. A few demonstrators also managed to get into the convention center, where they interrupted Trump's speech before they were stopped by security. Trump's rallies have consistently faced pro- and anti-protest during his race for the White House nomination, showing a deep divide over the candidate.
This is symptomatic of polarization, not only a political polarization, but cultural polarization.
American society is very deeply divided. It's divided by class, it's divided by race, it's divided by religion. And unfortunately, part of what's going on, these clashes that we see, and we should put it in perspective that these are relatively minor. In the United States, the political culture here tends to blow them out completely out of proportion.
A gunman has opened fire at a rap concert in New York, killing one and injuring 3 others. The shooting happened inside the venue before the hip-hop artist went on stage. There were around 1,000 people in the audience at the time. No arrests have been made so far. An Israeli rights group is accusing the Israeli army of covering up the abuse of Palestinians in the West Bank, adding that it is ending cooperation with the state's military. B'Tselem has worked for nearly 3 decades documenting human rights violations. The organization has pushed the army to investigate more than 700 incidents where Palestinians have either been killed, injured, or had damage done to their property. In 343 of those cases, an investigation was launched but no action taken, and in 182 was no official action at all. One of the cases B'Tselem reported was the death of a Palestinian girl shot by an Israeli soldier. Her parents spoke to the rights group.
لبنان الحمد لله رب العالمين بنت بكت مجتهدة
لها سنة أخيرة عن التخرج وتخرجت للآخرة الله يرحمها فراحت زيارة ورجعت اللي مقتولة
لبنان الحمد لله رب العالمين بنت بكت مجتهدة مرحة تحب كل الناس مش قادر
The IDF told RT that B'Tselem's statement doesn't reflect reality and they thoroughly investigate all claims of misconduct, including those from the human rights group. Amir Oren is a senior correspondent and columnist for Israel's Haaretz newspaper. He says that even if cases go to court, soldiers get very light sentences, which frustrates Palestinians.
B'Tselem is the most respected and well-established human rights organization and has gained a lot of credibility on both sides. The Israeli military has even thanked B'Tselem for its professional attitude. What happened this week is that B'Tselem grew tired of what happened after it has collaborated with the military authorities. Even when they prosecute later, the courts give very light, very lenient sentences to the accused. So the Palestinians who cooperated with B'Tselem, knowing that B'Tselem will cooperate with the Judge Advocate General, grew frustrated, and B'Tselem decided that enough is enough.
At least 3 people have been killed and dozens injured in a powerful blast at a chemical plant in India. The explosion happened in a town about 40 kilometers from Mumbai, sparking a fire. Locals say the blast was so strong it shattered windows 3 kilometers away. Coming up next, Max and Stacey discuss retirement in the US in the latest Kaiser report.